Nice to be with you all. Barrett. All right. Simon Sinek, start with why. We'll get to your introduction, but at Ford, so we're going to be talking about the skills journey. When you think about the future and where we have to go, and you think about skills, what's the big why bother at all?
I think future starts with a look back, which is I posit that Ford has been a skills-based organization for our entire 121 years. Like, think of old school apprenticeship models, the way that we revolutionized production systems and such. So I think it's a look back at where we've been with skills. A look forward requires us to maybe reimagine how we assess, how we infer, how we develop, but I really don't think that much has changed.
There's probably not as many people who can reach as far back and as Ford and talk about apprenticeship model and development as you can. But all right, we are going to, last question before we just get to the foundation of what Ford is doing. But how did you come into this line of work, and just a little introduction to yourself for the audience who doesn't know
Cool.
you.
Yeah, so my name is Barrett Evans, Chief Learning Officer, Ford Motor Company, and I got into this line of work because of cash registers. So I worked for Macy's. I have a fashion degree. I'm probably the only person at Ford with a fashion degree. And we were launching a new cash register system. Someone saw me teaching other people, and that was 15 years ago, and found my way into HR and learning, and now doing so for Ford.
I didn't know that. I've known Barrett for a while. Cash registers.
Yeah.
And, the jacket looks fantastic, by the way, so the degree fits. All right. So with that, let's just set the table. As you came into Ford, what is sort of state of the state, then catch us up to the present day, kind of what is lay of the land, and then what is the goal and the objective, and then we'll double click a little bit.
Yeah, the journey for Ford with Degreed was introduced peak quarantine, I would say, and at a accelerated introduction or implementation because of this new remote work. Ford was not a remote company. It was in person. It was in the plant, right? That's really where that behavior started. And it was, Degreed was introduced as a way to reach colleagues, provide care, distribute learning in a new way. It is now the most accessed platform at Ford. I think we just crossed 100,000 active users out of our 150,000 perhaps around the world in 125 countries. And so it's got some pretty far reach. It is the front door for all things learning when we think about integrations and where we have colleagues going to find development, which can mean many different things. So it's been a pretty cool journey, and just remain. I think we're really proud of it being the place that so many of our colleagues go so often, and it is definitely gets some jealousy from our internal comms partners as we own the most popular platform.
Most popular platform. I love hearing that. So for anyone who isn't familiar with Degreed, so started it in 2012, right as the world of kind of the consumer education internet was exploding. You had Coursera, Udacity, edX kind of come into the scene 2011. You had Pluralsight, and at the time, lynda.com would become LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy, and Sal Khan had his TED Talk right about that time. So Bill Gates introduced Sal Khan to the world. And so, it's like learning was exploding, and it was becoming clear that we were going to exist in a world where we were learning over the entirety of our lives and across many platforms and providers. So when Barrett says sort of becomes the front door, what Degreed built was the ability to sit on top of the very emergent and fractured ecosystem, to integrate with all of it, so that there could be a single place to come and engage with the underlying providers and content, and as Degreed would mature, different point solutions. But now in 2025, so COVID has kind of settled down. You stood it up inside of COVID to be able to engage with the workforce digitally, remotely, sort of all of a sudden and all at once. A lot has happened at Ford inside the last couple of years. I imagine that a lot is happening in the last 5 days at Ford. You guys are not in a small way disinterested in the ever-changing landscape of tariffs and what it is going to mean. So as these business moments come, the imperatives come, what are you working on now? What is the priority? And, what are some of the challenges maybe?
We are positioning learning as a remedy to a VUCA environment. And VUCA, like a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that pretty much sums up where we are.
I don't think I've ever heard that.
Today.
VUCA.
VUCA, it's an Army War College term, and it was in recognition of a need to teach a soldier how to fight a different battle than what we had been fighting. And so there's a lot of adjacencies between what we're doing today, and learning agility is the blue thread that we can pull through all of those to help employees feel grounded and supported. And I want to go back to my statement about always been a skills-based organization. And there are things that have changed about that. I think we know that the shelf life of those skills has changed. The transparency in which I expect an employee to tell me their proficiency level, or they expect me to show them their proficiency level, like that has changed. And I think an increasing recognition that experience is not a proxy for proficiency. And by that I mean a length in a role in a resume does not tell me how proficient you are in a skill. And it has historically been a proxy. And so finding new and innovative ways to infer skills, to measure skills, to develop skills, I think that's the transition that we're making in like the future of a skills-based organization.
There's a lot there. McKinsey has data. It's now almost 2 years old. I think it's about a year and a half old, which was on the relative advantage of skill-based hiring vis-a-vis hiring based on credentials and hiring based on work experience. And I think we all self-selected to come to this conference. I think this is an audience that generally is probably disposed. Thank you.
It was there.
It was there, tip of the tongue. It's been long days. This is my third time on stage today, so it's getting to me. But I don't think it would be that surprising to this audience to hear that skills-based hiring is much more effective than hiring based on academic credentials. It's 5x more predictive of on-job success. But it should still blow everyone's socks off that skills-based hiring is more than 3.5x predictive than hiring based on work experience. So when you say experience is no longer a good enough, it's not a proxy of skill. I think that McKinsey research shows, if they were good proxies for each other, that number should sort of collapse. If they're interchangeable signal, but they're not. Skill is a much more powerful and predictive signal than even work experience. And that we don't really talk about that. I think that really should sort of be a big light bulb kind of for us to appreciate in the industry. But
I think it's also an incredible leader bias moment, because many of our most senior leaders in any of our organizations came from a world where you were promoted based on experience or degree. As I currently break our existing tuition reimbursement model at Ford and move away from fully funding unlimited executive MBAs for the world to try and go into more of stackable credentials and actually fueling transformation with short-term learning. So those are just examples of biases our leaders have that are incredibly complicated to break. And I think what Degreed has offered us, at least in skill measurement, skill assessment, is data that we can use to profess.
So you talked about, I heard a couple of things in earlier panels that are valuable, I think, to reference. So came from a luncheon that was sort of a skills-based theme, and Walmart talked about their journey was hard because it's if you imagine the skills-based future, there's a ton of utility in it. But you have to start somewhere, and if you start, let's say, one skills-based initiative in one part of the organization, but the rest of the organization doesn't yet speak the language of skills, you have to start somewhere, but there's not really utility if just one pocket is thinking this way, operating this way. But so how do you get from that initial low utility start to that future where an organization really is kind of speaking the vernacular of skills and has that atomic unit common across the organization and the practices and the systems. So, I mean, where are you guys in that journey of pushing and maturing, and what have been some of the challenges you've confronted?
There are monthly moments, at least, where it's a senior leader of, Barrett, what are we doing about skills? Well, what do you want to do about skills? They've heard people talking about skills, and it's a buzz, and so they want to know what we're doing about skills. And I think the best response has been positioning skills as answers to challenges. And so in no room, meeting, or conversation have we positioned skills as the lead, but rather it's been the follow to a challenge that they're facing. And so if you're listening closely enough, in every conversation, these leaders are giving us exactly what the skills it is that they're looking for. Now, they wouldn't answer the questions that way, but as you digest, if you will, like some of the challenges that they're facing, I'll give you an example. Quality in manufacturing environments. We measure quality. One of the metrics that we use to measure quality is called R1003, which is how many repairs are required on 1,000 vehicles at 3 months in service. So after I ship 1,000 cars, check back in 3 months, how many of those had a defect that required something? The objective is to be at 0, right? And then we measure 0 months, 3 months, and so on. And so was listening to a leader talk about achieving this metric, like working against this metric to improve quality for the customers. And what I heard in that conversation was that we did not have managers that were driving Gemba, right? So there's a lean practice called Gemba, which is a Japanese term. It really means go and see, ask why, and show respect. And that's a pretty easy skill to train, right? And so we built, we used that as our in, because the question was never, hey, learning team, or hey, Barrett, what can you do? We were just sort of there listening along. Those are always the best opportunities, I think, to jump in and share how we think a solution like a degreed learning program or an academy or a plan or pathway, whatever it might be. But I think that the way that we've positioned it is what's got us the seat at the table.
I like that. You talked about earlier, Ford has been a skills-based organization for over 100 years, and yet this moment it's different. Different how you expect people to give you their knowledge of their skills, their proficiencies, how you are eliciting it from them. We now exist in an AI world. And, how do you see that facilitating this? To what degree are you guys using AI in the inference or the validation of skill inside of Ford?
I think first, like using tools inside Degreed to do some of that work. When I think about how we're positioning AI and learning at Ford, one is around unleashing what I would call unleashing positive productivity. And by that I mean not just increasing the work that you do, but rather finding opportunities to automate other parts of the work so we can spend more time on the better parts of the work. So that increase in positive productivity, but also having conversations, especially with leaders in the learning space, around what it will mean to manage a workforce of humans and robots. Like this generation of leaders, us in the room and those that we're developing now, we are now going to be managing humans and agents. I think I know how to do that, and I spend a lot of time with those things. So there's more people that know a lot less about how to do that, and that makes me nervous. So it's having conversations around learning agility is my thread through all of this, that the more time we spend educating our workforce on how to learn, exploring the ways that they like to learn, being transparent about the options they have to learn, just makes us more prepared from a future state perspective that I don't know what I need you to learn in 2 years. Right now, I think I know what it is, but the better investment that we can make is in learning agility, which is also a great part of our partnership.
So, a couple of, I think, really interesting threads in there, which is, I think an open question right now is, are we going to end up doing HR for AI agents. Or there's a world where it kind of bends that way. There's a world where IT manages agents. There's a world where HR manages the agents. And like as you contemplate that future, there's kind of pros and cons to both approach. And I think it's an interesting thought exercise. But don't want to get maybe lost there. But I think was also in a panel earlier where woman raised the question to the audience, do you know what skills you have? And I think, do you guys know what skills you have? And as you think, I just said one head shake, no. I mean, it's kind of this, like when you pose it that way, it's like, I don't know. And one, I think there's ways of helping get this data from people quite quickly if you can change the paradigm. So one is, what skills are required for you to be successful? And I think people will pretty quickly start telling you kind of what makes them or someone on their team good at their job. So changing this paradigm. But I say that to get to really this point, which is I think we're in this interesting moment with AI, which is right now, AI, it's an oversimplification, but AI effectively knows all public knowledge. But it doesn't know what you know. And so our interaction right now with AI has this immense barrier to it. It knows everything, but it doesn't know what you know. And so it leaves you or the organization in the driver's seat of having, when you say, I don't know what skills people are going to need in 2 years, there's this deficiency right now because we, the humans, are in the driver's seat of approaching AI and telling it to do something, asking it to do something. But I think we will get, on this journey together at Forward and Degreed, Degreed more than any other platform in the world has the ability to track everything you've learned. And as AI can understand, maybe not immediately everything you know, but everything that you have recently learned, I think our relationship to AI is going to change, which is once it knows kind of all public knowledge and it knows what you know, the only thing now you have to kind of, mix in the recipe is that corporate goal. You said you're working backwards always from the business objective. And once AI knows those three things, I think we're going to see kind of the journey, because AI will start being able to take us on a journey rather than us showing up and asking it, the next prompt.
And I call what you're describing like signal infrastructure, which is all those different signals that are happening across the organization, and we're just not tuned into them. For example, with permission, of course, calendar data is incredibly rich. You could find the most collaborative person in your organization, I think, by looking at calendar data. Like, how often does that person interact with someone outside of their chief's pyramid?
Cross-functional, yeah.
Right? Like, that would be an interesting thing to look at. That's a signal. 360 feedback, that's a signal. Like, all these different places. Imagine if every time you got off a meeting, if you use Teams, it usually asks, like, how would you rate the quality of this meeting? That's cool. What if every time it said, how would you rate the person that led this meeting? Every time. That's immediate feedback. That's a signal, right, where you start to get, anyway, we could talk all day about that, but I think signal infrastructure, as we put responsibly the right like radars out to like collect those things, I think it just increases the benefit to both parties.
Well, amazing. If I might be so bold as to volunteer, I would normally volunteer myself, but I think it's much more interesting. If anyone is interested in learning more about the journey to be able to connect with Barrett, are you open to?
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. All right. So come swarm Barrett when you're done. Anyone who's interested on the journey or has additional questions. And so grateful for you joining us here today. And thank you all for taking time out. And thank you so much.
Thank you.